Hey guys, and welcome to yet another Monkey Pixels video. My name is Damien Cooper, and today we're talking about the Canon C200. The good, the bad, who this camera is actually for, and if it's still worth purchasing in 2020.
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
So I haven't uploaded last Sunday or last Tuesday, and that was due to me being completely deep down in the rabbit hole of researching cameras, comparing specs, and maybe making a decision of purchasing a new camera in 2020. Because we already had the C200 and sold it last year, and I won't get into why I did it, and it didn't really have a lot to do with the C200 itself. I actually made a video about it, briefly touching up on it, why I did it, and if you're interested in that, you can actually watch it. I think it's a pretty cool video. But for now, we only had the EOS R. Two of them, we were traveling a lot, but we definitely missed the quality of the Canon C200, so we wanted to step up our game in 2020 again. And as a matter of fact, we actually did pull the trigger and bought a new cinema camera a couple days ago. And this talking head is recorded on it, and if you follow us on Instagram, then you already know what it is. But since I already did all the research and I wanted to do this video, I took down all the notes. I will still talk about the Canon C200 for everyone interested in purchasing it. Spoiler alert, we did not buy it, but that doesn't mean that it isn't for you or even for us. So since you're watching this video, you probably know all the specs of the Canon C200 already, but I will still go over the key features of the camera to let you know what I think makes this camera so great. It obviously records 4K up to 60 frames in Canon RAW Light at a bitrate of 10 gigabits. When shooting 25 frames you have 12-bit, and when shooting up to 60 frames you have 10-bit. So that's obviously a really high quality codec. The other codec of the camera is pretty much the opposite. It shoots 4K up to 60 frames again, but only at 100 mbit and in H.264, 420, 8-bit. So you really have two worlds and nothing in between. The next features that makes this camera actually so great and stand out is the internal ND filters, as well as the XLR audio and audio controls, and the overall handling of the camera. And another thing that separates it from a lot of other cinema cameras out there is the amazing dual pixel autofocus, which works really great and reliably. So having the specs out of the way, let's talk about who this camera is actually for. And quite frankly, I think Bell and I are the perfect example for it. Small crews or even one-man band shooters that want to have the highest quality but be able to have an all-in-one machine, and that is something that the Canon C200 offers. We used this camera when it first came out and then continued using it for pretty much 2 years. And we used it for all kinds of different jobs. For commercials, for music videos, but also recording talking heads or even events sometimes. And yes, of course we missed having the 10-bit codec internally, but I actually think that the two codecs are the best of both worlds. Because if you really want to shoot a music video or a commercial, the 4K RAW up to 60 frames is an amazing choice. But if you really want to go down low and shoot a wedding or maybe an event where you need to record longer times, then the 4K MP4 codec actually worked pretty well for us. Especially having the dual pixel autofocus makes this camera a unique tool for a lot of filmmakers out there who are doing a lot by themselves. Having the ability to use the face detection when running gun in on weddings or documentaries or even shooting interviews is such a great thing to have. Especially when throwing it on a gimbal where it's way harder to focus without a focus puller, having the camera do the autofocus pulling itself is actually a pretty big deal. So now that we've established who this camera is for, let's look at the competition, because we made this video in 2020 and we're trying to figure out if this is the best camera for the price. And speaking of the price, here it's a little bit tricky, because I found that the prices vary depending on your location a lot. So we're sitting in Vienna, Austria, and the prices haven't gone down here. So I think it retails for about 65 to 6,800 euros, which is roughly $7,500 including taxes, which is almost the price that you had to pay when it first came out over 2 years ago. But when looking at our neighbors in Germany, you get the camera for around 5,800 euros including taxes, which equals around $4,800 to $5,000 without taxes. And that is for the A version, so including everything, the top handle, the monitor and the side grip. When you're looking at the Canon C200B version, which is quite frankly the version that I would get when purchasing it, you're looking at $4,000 on B&H excluding taxes. Unfortunately, you can't get the B version anywhere else than the United States. So if you're from Europe or anywhere else, you're left with purchasing the Canon C200A version with all the accessories that quite frankly we never really used, and that's kind of a bummer. But even when purchasing the C200B, you definitely need at least a monitor or a top handle to be able to actually work with the camera. So let's say we're looking at around $5,000 for the camera as an average wherever you are. And although there's so many more great cameras coming out, especially in the cinema camera department, I still find that the Canon C200 is somewhat unique when looking at its features. So when looking over to Sony and you want to shoot 4K 60, maybe even have RAW capabilities, a good and reliable autofocus, you need to go all the way up to the Canon FX9, which retails about $11,000. Yes, the Canon FX9 might actually be virtually better in pretty much everything that the Canon C200 can do, but it's also more than twice the price. So I don't think Sony actually has an offer in this unique market when it comes to the C200. From Blackmagic we have the Pocket Cinema 6K, which has amazing specs. It shoots 6K up to 50 frames per second in RAW internally. But it doesn't have continuous autofocus, it has no internal ND filters, the battery life sucks, and when you want to make it usable, you have to spend a little bit more money. But then again, it only starts at $2,000. But again, for the person that actually wants to shoot with dual pixel autofocus, run and gunning, I don't think that the Blackmagic is actually the perfect camera. So pretty much not a competition. Then there's obviously a lot of Z cams these days, and although they have pretty insane specs, none of these have actually autofocus, so maybe not the best choice. Next up, let's look at Nikon. And that pretty much brings us to Canon's own camera lines. And looking at the C series, we have the C500 Mark II, which is way more expensive, so definitely not in the same category, and the newly announced C300 Mark III, which actually is a pretty good deal, but again, it's also almost 3 times as expensive. So again, people looking at the C200 are probably not looking at the C300 Mark III. So when it comes to the C series, when you're looking in that kind of price range and for that kind of user group, then there's no competition. And then we have the Canon 1DX Mark III. When looking at the video recording options, it comes pretty close to the Canon C200. We have internal RAW recording, 5.5K up to 60 frames per second, and we also have a pretty great 4K 10-bit 422 codec recording internally. We had the C200 for so long, and we also tested the 1DX Mark III, and when it comes to recording options and image quality, I think they're pretty close. But when it comes to everything else, they're actually not on the same level when it comes to shooting video. You don't have an articulating screen, no XLR audio, and no internal ND filters. Plus, the camera is even more expensive than the Canon C200, so as a viable option, unless you really need to shoot stills with the camera, I don't think it's really big of a competition. And if I was just a solely video shooter, I would hands down take the C200 over the Canon 1DX Mark III all day, every day. We also have the Panasonic S1H, which is also a really great camera, but since it doesn't feature internal NDs or XLR audio or dual pixel autofocus or any kind of usable autofocus, again, it's not really a competition when this is what you're looking for. So as of right now, in my opinion, there just isn't any competition for the C200 when this is specifically what you're looking for in that price category. But what about the newly rumored and announced cameras? So obviously everybody's talking about the EOS R5, but we don't really know too much about the camera as of yet. We don't know the price tag, for example, or the specific shooting options, but what we pretty much can bank on that it doesn't have internal ND filters or XLR audio. I actually think that this might actually be one of the closest competitors to the Canon C200 in 2020 when it comes to image quality, recording options, and the option of having dual pixel autofocus. But we don't know too much about the camera yet, and it's definitely just a mirrorless camera and not a cinema camera, so we'll have to see. But here's a camera that has been just announced, and that might actually be the biggest competitor for the Canon C200 in 2020, and that is the red Komodo. Komodo? I don't know. So what do we know about the camera? It shoots 6K up to 50 frames, it records onto CFast 2.0 cards, and it features a face detect autofocus for $6,000. But knowing red, the 6K won't probably get you very far, because you need at least a monitor and a top handle. But also knowing red, the camera will probably be very modular, so you can at least add some XLR audio and maybe even internal ND filters. But then we're probably looking at a much bigger price tag, but again, I think this might actually be a camera that is pretty close to a camera like the C200 for the same kind of user base, and I'm excited to see what this camera actually brings. But like I said, it's going to be more expensive. So what's my verdict here? I think if you're a one-man band or a small crew and you need the flexibility of the dual pixel autofocus and the different kind of codecs for long shooting, as well as really high quality when shooting corporate videos or music videos, I still think that this is probably the best camera to get in 2020 for the price tag of around $5,000 to $6,000. And if you can get it, I would suggest getting the C200B version and just add an external monitor and a side grip, because this is probably the best bang for your buck. So what do you think? Is there any competition that I missed in this video when looking at all the features that we need and are looking for in the C200? And do you still think that the C200 is a viable option when purchasing a new camera in 2020? Let me know down in the comments below. And maybe subscribe to our channel, follow me on Instagram if you want to know what kind of camera we bought, and I'll see you on the next one.